We're back talking SEC football. We're going to dive into the South Carolina Gamecocks today. Jordan Kaye will join us. He is from the state newspaper up in South Carolina. He covers the Gamecocks, so we'll get a in-depth look at South Carolina football. But first, got to remind you about our friends at BetOnline, your number one source for the NBA and NHL playoffs this season. Every stat, every matchup, and even live odds while the games are being played. When the game's over, head over to the online casino and get in on a game of blackjack or poker or unwind with one of the over 150 slot games. Head over to the website today to get in on the action. Don't forget to use promo code BELIEVE, that is BLEAV, for your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Again, promo code BLEAV for 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Bet online, the game starts here. So the South Carolina Gamecocks, again, Jordan, I want to go back to last season for just a second because a lot of expectations on the Gamecocks didn't quite live up to that. What's
Yeah.
kind of been the vibe since last season, getting ready for a new season after a pretty good spring for the Gamecocks?
Yeah, I think every year, fans are ready to turn the page and next year could be our year. And that's kind of like the motto around South Carolina, where it's like, hey, there's always next year. There were people very disappointed in the 5-7 record last season, especially because there were games that they could have won. That Florida game they could have won. The Texas A&M game, it was right there. They just couldn't block for Spencer Rattler. The Clemson game was a 2-score game, and the offense couldn't move the ball at all. And so there was a lot of disappointment. A lot of people saying, "Hey, things need to change here." A lot of people wanting the defensive coordinator out, and that stayed the same. But there were a lot of positional coaches changes, mostly by necessity. A lot of guys who just decided to leave for one reason or another. Some two got head coaching jobs. A couple others just left for other reasons. But no, with Spencer Rattler gone, I think there's a lot of people that actually have genuine excitement because there's a redshirt freshman, LaNorris Sellers, who this kid is, I think he's like 6'4", 230, just a massive human being. Kind of like, they try and kind of compare his body frame to like Josh Allen, where it's okay. He's going to be able to run over a couple defenders if he needs to. So that's where the excitement starts. And then they had one of the biggest transfer classes in the entire country. Like they got like 20 something kids out of the portal, which, could go either way. So
Yeah.
We'll see how it goes. But, they tried to really bolster up their front seven, really try to bolster up the linebacker room, got a few pieces at wide receiver and offensive line too. So that's kind of a lot of the unknowns going into the year.
I want to talk about LaNorris Sellers. You again, like you mentioned, you're in a post Spencer Rattler world now for South Carolina. They're looking for the next guy. Robbie Ashford, of course, transferred in from Auburn, but LaNorris Sellers, who was on the roster, went into the spring, and I thought had a fantastic spring game. He looked great,
Yeah.
played the part. What do they like most about Sellers? And just in being around the program, what is it his job now?
It's basically his job, unless he gets hurt or something. It's his job. They're trying everything to not, totally give it to him right away. But
Right.
they basically come out and said, "Hey, he's the starter going into the fall." It's like, okay, thanks. But what I was really impressed with Sellers in the spring game is like this guy is so big, so mobile, could throw the ball probably 75, 80 yards, and he just consistently just made the right throw. They were in a pretty vanilla offense, so it's hard to know exactly like how many times he could have even thrown downfield. But I was just really impressed with he took exactly what the defense gave him. He was able to escape a couple pressures, always kept his head up, but just consistently, hey, if there's a running back in the flat, who can get us 5 yards, just throw him the ball. Let's hit the slant route early and make sure we can not get sacked. And so he was, I just thought, really efficient, and that's something from a redshirt freshman that you don't always see.
Yeah, for sure. And I know you mentioned all the transfers that were brought in, but what do the pieces around Sellers look like for the Gamecocks in the skill positions?
Yeah, it's a lot of transfer wide receivers, which is really scary because a lot of them are like unproven. It's not like they went and grabbed someone out of the portal who you're like, holy cow, that's our number one receiver. They do have Nick Harbor, who was the former 5-star. He's going into his sophomore year now. He's actually running track right now, trying to get into the Olympics. So he's running like 10 or 20, 30 something, 200-meter, 10-1, like 100-meter, like legit times where a lot of people think he's probably going to make the Olympic trials. So there's that dude who's going to be probably the number one receiver. But outside of that, there's a lot of guys who just are unproven. They got a Louisville transfer who had decent numbers, a guy from Miami of Ohio, okay numbers. And the thing is, like, a lot of these dudes are like 5'10" to 6 foot. So outside of like Harbor, there's very little size. And that is a little concerning. They do have some tight ends who can catch the ball. So maybe that's where the size will come from. But yeah, I think that's right now the biggest question mark of this team is like, are these wide receivers any good? Who's going to step up? And that's kind of yet to be seen.
As far as running backs go, I know there was some injuries in the spring. You didn't really get a full
Yeah,
glimpse at the running back room, but is that going to be especially with the addition of Rocket Sanders? Is that something we'll see a lot? Is the Gamecocks running the ball?
100%. I think Rocket Sanders is going to be the blanket just that will help LaNorris Sellers so much this season. And it's not even just Rocket Sanders too. They've got two dudes behind him that they got from the transfer portal, one from North Texas, one from South Carolina State, who they're very, very high on. So there's a chance that they could just be a run-first team and kind of, establish themselves like that. And, I'd expect Rocket Sanders to also be a pretty big factor out of the backfield catching passes. A dude that versatile. They have the depth, too, to be able to play like a two running back system. So it's going to be really interesting. But yes, they are going to lean very heavily on Rocket Sanders.
I want to flip over to the defensive side of the ball. Just watching the spring game, a lot of young guys it seems like, but really impressed with a couple of guys on the edge there.
Yeah, it's they're playing this defense like a flex nickel. So basically that just means you're keeping the nickel the same. So there's always going to be 5 defensive backs, and then you can change the front. It's either a 3-man front or a 4-man front. Basically, that like rarely works. It's very, very hard to make it happen. But I think South Carolina like actually can pull it off because of what you're saying. Those edge dudes, they're so deep at that position with guys who are so long and fast and athletic. Dudes like a Georgia Tech transfer, Kyle Kennard, phenomenal. They're bringing back like a graduate student, Bam Martin Scott, who hasn't done much his college career, but they changed scheme at the end of last year, and he really came on. They've got a 5-star freshman in Dylan Stewart, and this kid, I mean, if your listeners haven't like watched or seen this kid, just like go look up like his high school tape. It's disgusting. Just like playing in Washington, D.C., terrorizing people. It's crazy. And he's going to probably start right away. But the thing is, like, I'm just like listing guys. It's like they have so many where they're going to be able to have a really good rotation of guys who can play as like a outside linebacker or then move to defensive end based on what scheme they want to call.
As far as the defensive line and the offensive line, both, what's the Gamecocks looks like on the line on both sides of the ball?
Yeah, defensive line. I mean, they've got a lot of dudes returning, and that was one of their key emphasis heading into the offseason. Is like, all right, make sure our collective has the money to bring back the defensive line dudes, and so they got a lot of really experienced returners like T.J. Sanders, a dude named Tonka Hemingway, a guy named Alex Huntley. They're going to be okay there, especially with the experience. The offensive line's a lot more of a question mark because last season that was the Achilles heel. That's what led to the 5-7 record. That's what basically almost got Spencer Rattler killed, it seemed like, every week. The problem is they had like injury after injury. Like they didn't start the same offensive line, I think, until the last week of the season. Like, they were just constantly changing it due to injuries. I mean, there was at one point, I think 10 scholarship offensive linemen had been injured. Like, it was just crazy. Wow. So this year they're bringing a lot of the same dudes back. They got a couple guys from the transfer portal. One from like NC Central that actually might, have a chance to play at guard, but it's going to be a really, really young offensive line. There's a chance they start a true freshman, Josiah Thompson, who is a 5-star at left tackle. Wow. That's possible. There's a chance they start a sophomore at right tackle. And then there's a chance there's a redshirt freshman starting along the offensive line again. It's going to be a very, very young group. And it's just kind of yet to be seen, what those dudes look like in an SEC game. They seem good in practice, but it's hard to really know when you're that young.
Yeah, for sure. And you mentioned you'll find out an SEC game. Well, week 2 is a conference game for South Carolina. It's a tough schedule for the Gamecocks, but that week 2 conference game, I always feel like that's tough for any team in that position where you find out quick how conference play is going to go.
Especially when that game's on the road. It's just like, crap, like we're already doing this. So that's tough. I mean, thank goodness it wasn't like, an Ole Miss or an Alabama or an Oklahoma that week. So they lucked out a little bit, but yeah, that's going to be tough. I mean, they usually have one of the top 5 hardest schedules in the country. This is going to be right there, maybe number 1. I mean, it's just brutal up and down every week. They've got LSU at home, Ole Miss at home, A&M, Missouri at home. They go on the road to Alabama, to Kentucky, to Clemson. That's, one of their non-con games, to Oklahoma. It's brutal. And that's just kind of the thing that sucks is like this team might be good by South Carolina standards, and like 7 wins is going to be throw a parade if you get to 7 wins. And that's what sucks about, the SEC right now. It's like the schedule is so hard for a team like South Carolina, which, isn't really on Alabama's level, isn't on the, Oklahoma or Texas level. And so you're going through the schedule, just be like, where are 7 wins? Like, it's hard to find. They do play 3 cupcake non-conference games. They get Vanderbilt at Vanderbilt. So in your head, you're like, that's probably 4 wins right there. The 3 non-con Vandy. And then it's like, where are the other 2? Where are the other 3? And you can kind of like maybe talk yourself into like beating Kentucky on the road. You can maybe talk yourself into beating Texas A&M or perhaps, LSU or Missouri in Williams-Brice Stadium. If that's a night game and that's rocking, maybe that's a win. But outside of that, it's hard to find wins.
Yeah, it is. Tough schedule. Looking forward to Gamecock football coming up 2024. Jordan, really appreciate you coming on and talking some South Carolina football. We'll have to do it again soon, but appreciate your time today.
Thanks, Chase. Thanks, man.
We have you covered all things SEC football here on Southeastern 14.